All right, we are live. So I don't know how this whole thing got started and what we were planning on doing, but we saw a lot of other people posting stupid Zoom videos and decided we would try to do something ourselves. We don't get to see each other very much, so this is the one time that we can hang out and talk shop and enjoy a pint or whatever it is that you have in front of you. And we thought that we would make the topic more conversational, not PowerPoint driven. I think we might have a couple slides that appear, but we were going to just talk about POA. And so we've got a large majority of all the turf faculty here. We're missing Dr. Udine and Dr. Huff. They couldn't make it. But everybody's going to kind of share a little bit of information. And I thought the way we would start is, Fidanza, you're going to give us a brief overview of POA, right? Some historical perspective. And before you do that, I'll mention to the participants, you should see a Q&A and a chat. And so if you have any questions, you can put them in there and we'll try to answer them as we go along. Mike, it's all you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is enjoying their favorite beverage of choice today. I want to apologize in advance. My headphone, the volume might be a little too loud, or maybe I'm screaming at my kids too much. I was watching the History Channel this week, the biography of General Ulysses S. Grant. Okay, and so it got me in the mood to look into the history of Poa annua. So just for a few minutes, bear with me. I went on the turfgrass information file and typed in the search term Poa annua, came back with 10,575 citations. So I knew you're all thinking, wow, that's a lot of citations. The oldest goes back to 1790, and in 1886, there was a more recent one about Poa annua in agricultural soils. But in 1903, the first mention of Poa annua as a lawn grass was in a garden publication. And then in 1907, the Royal Historical Society of London, to which I am not a member, but they wrote an article on golf course greens and mentioned Poa annua. Now, in 1916, Poa annua was mentioned as a component of putting greens in an actual golfer magazine. But it wasn't until 1921 that Piper and Oakley, famous Piper and Oakley agronomists with the USGA green section, wrote a botanical description in the USGA green section record. That was 1921. And let me read from you real quick. You're going to enjoy this. W.A. Alexander, who must have been a green section agronomist, in 1921 also wrote, and he quoted, I'll quote, "Poa annua will take out your green completely in 2 years unless taken out, 3 at the most." So in 1921, Poa annua was considered a scourge on putting greens, and he was referring to greens in the Chicagoland area. In 1926, again, Piper and Oakley wrote an article about Poa annua, its behavior and control. So here we are, almost 100 years later, still talking about Poa annua biology, ecology, and control. Now, looking at the scientific side of it, the research side of it, there were 83 to date, 83 master's and PhD dissertations, master's thesis, PhD dissertations on Poa annua. 83 just on Poa annua. Now, the first one was 1951 by Ralph Engel. It wasn't the focus, but it was mentioned in his work with Meadows. But our Penn State colleagues will appreciate this. The very first PhD dissertation focused solely on Poa annua was in 1971, Dr. Al Turgeon, and he worked on Poa annua control with endothol. Some of you old timers might remember endothol. That was our own Dr. Al Turgeon. And then lastly, and I'll leave you with this, in 2012, our own Dr. Huff, who's not on the panel today, but in 2012, he published his work looking at the sort of the molecular genetic side of Poa annua. The article was the evolutionary origin of Poa annua, where he uncovered or revealed that the parents were, the father was Poa supina, and Poa supina is the father, and Poa infirma is the mother of Poa annua. So thank you for spawning that devious species. But one last comment, as the late Stan Zahn, you guys remember he would say this in his talks with Poa annua: you either have to control it or you have to maintain it, one or the other. You have to decide. So anyway, I hope I set the table with a little historical walkthrough of Poa annua research literature. Again, 100 years later, and we're still talking about Poa annua and still revealing its secrets in turf.
I have a feeling we're going to be talking about it for another 100 years, even after this. I don't know if it ever changes. Hey, I got a question for you. So the age or the history of it, how does that compare to like your favorite mushroom species, your fairy ring stuff? When were those first described?
The very first fairy ring article that I found goes back to the 1400s. So a little bit back.
Poe is a baby then. I want to shift it over, Andy, to you, but before we do that, because I don't know who the panelists are. Thanks, Brian, left a comment. I'm going to put a poll up and have people take it to.
John, I can't hear you anymore. Can everyone else hear him?
I think it muted me, that's why. So I was just going to say, let these people take the polling and see where the problems are, so maybe we can address some of the specific issues, although it looks like it's pretty spread evenly all over the board.
I don't know. Are there a lot of, I don't recognize too many sports turf folks on there. There may be.
Yeah. I don't know either. I mean, I don't know. It could be a high school field manager. It could be anybody.
You want me to start talking about Poa on sports fields?
Yeah, sure. Just tell us like what the issue is there, right? You're the kind of the expert in the sports turf area. And so.
Yeah. And really high traffic turfs like football that's being used a lot. Poa annua isn't much of an issue because it just tears out and wears out pretty quickly. Other than, you know, if it comes in on sod, nobody's happy. And I have seen a Division I school, not Penn State, that put in a brand new football field. This was a number of years ago. They blamed the sod company for there being a lot of Poa, but the first thing they did after they put the Kentucky Bluegrass sod down was brought in their top dresser that they were using to collect clippings with, loaded it with sand, and sanded the brand new sod. And you could actually see where they started, and it started to thin out. So they were contaminating the whole area with Poa, and we're trying to blame the sod farm. So in heavily trafficked areas, it's not much of an issue. Where we see it on as issues is like baseball outfields. You know, the heavily trafficked portions of the baseball field, batters boxes and in front of the mound and so forth, you don't see it, but it will start to encroach there. And even lower use soccer, you know, if you don't have a lot of traffic, then the Poa annua can start to move in and cause problems. I think for baseball, it's always been a real serious issue because of the season, right? I mean, what are they going to do control-wise when they start playing March, April, depending on whether you're, you know, pro or high school, and play right through sometimes into October? You know, what kind of treatment can you do? And I think I'm going to throw it to Borger here in a second, but I think the idea, especially this year where the fields maybe were lying dormant and not being played on, to kind of go in with trim it as your growth regulator for the whole season is a great idea when it's not being played on. And we have a lot of baseball guys out there who've tried trim it, and about 2 to 3 apps in, they get scared because, you know, of what's going on with the Bluegrass, and they give up on it. And then their comment to everybody else is trim it doesn't work. No, you just didn't stick with trim it long enough. So I don't know, Borger, if you want to talk about trim it on Kentucky Bluegrass here in the north on baseball fields, I'll let you talk a little while.
Well, sure. You know, Andy, I got to say, you say it best. You didn't even say it this time, but, you know, baseball is all about aesthetics and functionality of the surface. And, you know, the last thing you want is some funky looking bluegrass when you're, you know, up in the stands. It freaks people out. That's the thing. You hit it exactly on the head. No matter what type of control or management strategy you try to take with Poa annua, you have to be consistent. If you stop midway through, it's going to revert back to whatever it was. Trivet, Cutlass, great products to control annual bluegrass. rate is an issue. It's a Kentucky bluegrass. You got to go a little bit lower rate than you would with perennial ryegrass, tall fescue, fine fescue scenarios, but usually there's not a POA problem in those sites. So, yes, choose a strategy, stay with it, and if you don't like what it looks like, maybe back off the amount or the frequency of whatever product you're putting down to, add some fertilizer to it, put some nitrogen in all your applications.
A little bit of N, like an eighth of a pound every app, maybe even a quarter pound every app, so that you
eighth to a quarter of a pound. All the research that I've ever done has no negative bearing on it. The other thing people do too is iron. They put iron in it because they don't want the plant to be growing. Just remember, you're using a PGR, plant growth regulator. You're going to reduce growth by 30 to 50% while the product is active. Just keep that in mind, especially if you have, I think we're going to go into damages or bad things about POA. You have damaged POA on a sports field and you're under a PGR, might not be the best thing. You got to grow it out. That's about all I got. I mean, if you want some more, I can talk about it. But
Jeff, I have a question. When I got to Penn State 2009, I think Livingston was putting like some ridiculous rates of trimmet on some of the areas because we weren't concerned about the look of it. Anybody remember what those rates were, or like what the recommendations that were being?
I know exactly what they are. I gave them the recommendations. They're right off the label. It was the highest amount of Poa annua, highest amount of trimmet applied to a Poa annua creeping bentgrass site that was allowed. And the exact rate escapes me, but it was on the label. We never went off label. We were following that. And this is what happens with a lot of people when they come to me and say, hey, Jeff, I want to control some annual bluegrass. And, I talk to them. It'll take an hour to set up their exact plan or strategy to do this or more. And one thing I always tell them is like, look, be careful what you wish for, because you are going to take some serious Poa annua out if you go on an aggressive program. And that's exactly what happened with the Valentine Research Center. The areas that they were doing was a perennial ryegrass, creeping bentgrass, annual bluegrass mix, right? We set it up. We took the POA out. Dave comes to me and says, Jeff, what are we doing here, man? It's all bare. I said, you're welcome. You got what you wanted, no POA. So be careful. So what he ended up doing, he sprayed it all with Roundup and overseeded it with rye again. That's the key. Maybe you should start with that if you can.
Hey, I'm going to throw it to Ben here in a minute, and we're going to start talking about golf. But before we leave sports turf, I want to hear everybody's opinion on this thing that's floated around for years. We use Primo on sod farms that go into the NFL and for football fields, and we come off of it in August and we're still getting good divot. We can see the difference in divot resistance in November when we quit using it the third week in August. But I've always heard this kicked around, and I want everybody's opinion. Is Primo a POA enhancer?
John, you want to say something about that?
I think we have a bunch of research that's been going on, and I don't know if it enhances it. It looks pretty much similar to what with no PGRs, but it definitely doesn't hurt it at all. I mean, I think that it's like candy to all of the species, bentgrass and POA. So, I don't know. I don't think it's an enhancer based on our research, but it definitely behaves just like if you had applied no PGR. So it's not causing any reduction in it. It's pretty healthy, and there probably could be some benefits from a disease standpoint or just stronger turf, but I don't know.
That's kind of the stuff that I found out too, John. I did some work in the past on it, where we looked at a tank mix. I see Brian's asking about, Cutlass Trimmet tank mix. There are actually products out there that come pre-packaged that include packed with butazole and methylpumazate and all kinds of stuff. Okay, and Primo.
So what's your opinion?
But yeah, what happens is it just kind of slows down the conversion practice, and that's not a bad thing sometimes. Low and slow, it just takes it a little bit longer to do it. I tell students when I'm talking about Primo, it's Primo POA perfect, because if you aren't doing anything, if you're trying to actually grow the plant, Primo is one of the good plant growth regulators to be thinking about using. There's nothing wrong with it.
Jeff, you remember when at the time Seba and Seba came out with
who? Seba Geigy? I don't know. I'm not old enough to know them.
Come on now. Just real quick, they were testing Primo as a POA control product, and they realized it wasn't controlling POA, but they discovered or uncovered that it was actually a plant growth regulator, and the rest is history. That's where they developed the PGR. I know Larry Stoll is on the participant attendee list, and I know he did a lot of that work in Southern California, developing Primo as a PGR. When originally it was intended as a POA control product, which it did not do.
Yeah.
That's like Rubigan being used to control POA, but ended up being a fungicide.
Well, Tribbit was originally sprayed to be a fungicide and ended up being a POA control product. So there's lots of that, where we started and where we ended type things going on.
And I think we're going to get into that a little bit when we get further along here. And we had some questions about herbicides, so we'll get to those when we get to.
You want to address the ethylfumicate? Pete, you want to say something about Progress?
As long as we're talking about sports turf, we've been doing work with ethylfumicate, which is Progress, or the generic brand, which is Poa Constrictor, both here at Valentine and out in the field. In fact, I worked with a sports turf manager down in Lebanon area, Coleman Park, to reestablish an infield down there where he was having major problems with Poa annua. And I only mention the pre-plant capabilities of that. If you use the EC formulation of Progress and apply it at 4 ounces per 1,000 square feet, after you've killed off the existing grass, which is Poa annua and whatever else is there, and aerated, and then you spray it and you seed the same day with perennial ryegrass, you can get almost a POA-free stand. Now the label says to wait I think it's about a week before you apply the Progress. It's kind of tough to do that if you were seeding. So we've done it the same day. I mean, I always follow the label, right? But I have done this a number of times, never had a problem, and I get about 96, 97% control of POA. But it only works with perennial ryegrass and tall fescue. Tall fescue is pretty safe too when it comes to Progress.
We did some of that initial work, Pete, with Dernoden at Maryland when we looked at that. And we were looking at herbicide tolerance at seeding timings, and you're right, like ryegrass, it's like not a problem at all. But when we were doing bent grass, then all of a sudden we started seeing major.
Yeah, and bluegrass, those two species are very closely related, obviously, and I've seen higher rates used in the fall for POA control in Kentucky bluegrass right here on campus. And if you get a hard winter, it's going to really set that bluegrass back, almost to the point where the POA is going to come back before the Kentucky bluegrass does. But ryegrass. Now, I've only seen one case where Progress has resulted in injury on ryegrass, and that was back in the mid-90s down in the Philadelphia area. And we still had a lot of perennial ryegrass fairways down there, and guys were spraying Progress at the 4 ounce rate for the EC formulation. And they were putting down 3 applications in the fall, about a month apart. And then we had a lot of ice cover on those fairways. And you can see right where they turned on the sprayer, shut off the sprayer, actually, on the last application, everything that got treated on the last application was dead, and everything that didn't get hit was still alive. It was pretty amazing. It didn't happen everywhere, but it happened on a couple of golf courses. And I think that has to do with the fact that it interferes with the epicuticular wax on the surface, and it just opens up the grass to a little bit more desiccation. And that's probably what happened with the ryegrass.
Yeah, there's also the issue of resistance with ethylfumicate. There's been a lot of people that have been using it quite a bit, and there could be issues from that standpoint. So I think it works in the right situation, but might not in others. Ben, Andy talked a little bit about the positives and negatives, and unique things in sports turf. What about golf? You don't have to finish that all at once.
Golf, man, what a good year for POA. At least in our part of the world, the northeastern U.S. I couldn't imagine a better putting surface going into the summer right now than what we've seen with POA this year. The last couple of years, definitely super soggy, a lot of rain, and that definitely favors POA in many regards. But this year, I think because of the temperatures that we've had in spring, so our early warm up in February and early March wasn't really benefiting bent grass, where people have 2 grass systems going on, which is most everybody in the state. And I will preface, our work is largely from Harrisburg to Pittsburgh, and there's a lot of POA grown in those areas, not so much in Fidanza's area. We don't tread on his territory, but that's more bent grass there. But really just walking a bunch of golf courses the last several weeks, last 10 weeks. POA's got a great advantage going into the summer, mostly because I believe mostly because of the temperature. It's been very cold until, just the last 7 days of really heating up. So rooting is really is looking very good right now. We were not getting a whole lot of rainfall, just timely rainfalls, so people could control moisture a little bit better. And really up until about last week, our bent grass in our POA bent mixes was looking pretty haggard, and places that have a lot of bent grass in their fairways are looking a little bit thinner than some of our places that are more pure POA. So the outlook on POA is really good. It's no secret, I'm a big fan of POA putting surfaces. I'm not going to sugarcoat things. You definitely need to disrupt a lot, I believe. I think what Jeff said, what Andy said about being consistent with practices such as PGRs, I think that's equally, if not more so, important with cultural practices. We have a little wrench in the works here this year with COVID-19 and maintenance and the intensity and the frequency of mowing that went on, and places that were able to maintain low mowing heights on pure POA surfaces or nearly pure POA surfaces have come through really well. There's just a lot of really good looking turf out there right now. So I think that's a silver lining for golf this year and those managing POA. Now we're starting to get into the time of the year where we've just had huge amount of seed heads produced and mowed off in unregulated areas, and especially collars and fairways where we're looking for insect damage. We're starting to see POA go off color a little bit, that yellowing, where to me as an entomologist, I'm always thinking, wow, that's something's going on below the surface right there. I don't know if Max can speak to this, if it's a fertility issue or what I suspect is more just natural senescence after possibly the inflorescence has been produced. I don't know what it is, but we typically see this period. Usually it's a lot earlier in the year, about mid-May or early May in Western Pennsylvania, where you start to see that little yellowing of the leaf blade that's going on. So.
Yeah. Ben, I think that's a little bit of end deficiency because the spring flush is over and the end reserves have been, funneled through and mowed off. And that's a good indication for managers to go ahead and start the spoon feeding.
Yeah, so I think that's, a couple of our local superintendent, I saw him, Dave Williams, who's my superintendent of Mountain View, where I belong. He refers to it as the POA puke phase, and it might behoove him, as Max is saying, to put down a little bit of in at this period. If that doesn't respond, weevil damage would be what I would think of in this part of the world. I guess that's the problem having a Zoom meeting like this with people all over the place. POA's grown all across the world, and so the environmental conditions are going to be very, very different, and the turf's response.
I want to add something to what you guys both said. The decline of Poa annua, especially after the production of seed heads, I've seen that many, many years. And the tiny bit of research that I've done on it, it looks like it's the plant has been diverting all of its efforts to put on a seed head because it's an annual plant. It's trying to get a prodigy out there. So that effort, it's kind of diverted its efforts from producing leaves and crowns and roots to putting on a seed head, because if it passes away or if it doesn't live anymore because of its annuality, it's a winter annual plant, they'll still have a seed to replace it. But is it truly a winter annual? No, because those yellowy looking plants will survive. I agree with what you said. Max put some fertility on it, you're good to go.
Yeah, and I think where we see that, yellowing that's often mistaken for insect damage is in collars, or maybe not collars, but fairways and approaches where they might not be regulated to the extent that putting surfaces are. We don't see this yellowing within the interior of the surface. So, and, you know, I'm sure that most superintendents are on top of the fertility game, basically because of what's come out of the, you know, the Rutgers group with the anthracnose work in the early 2000s. So I always thought it was the same thing. Like the plant can only do so much, and it's expending all this energy into putting it on a seed head. It doesn't really leave it to do much else. So other than growth regulation, I don't know if you can really, trick the plant with N to get it through that or not.
Well, I think part of it is, you know, getting that on regulation for seed heads, and then getting some fertility like Max said, but then also getting it on something like Primo if you're trying to manage POA, if you're trying to, you know, keep it as your desirable species, to keep that energy, as much extra energy as possible in the plant. So I think this is why all of these things are so difficult, because you start talking about managing these things and it's like, well, you talk to Max and it's about fertility. You talk to Ben and it's about insects. You talk to me and it's about diseases and somebody else. So there's so many things that are being thrown out there that it makes it very complicated to manage. And it's just the way it is, I think. Going towards the things of like the negatives and the pest problems. Ben, you still have the floor. Why don't you just, obviously annual bluegrass weevils are a primary pest in our area, but what are some of the big pests from an insect standpoint in annual bluegrass?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, apart from annual bluegrass weevil, you could get crane flies or leather jackets, you could get black turfgrass attenuus, but those insects will attack other grasses as well. And now we're seeing that the annual bluegrass weevil will even attack creeping bentgrass. So where we once used to say like, oh yeah, maybe a management strategy would be to get rid of all your POA, which if you go to the New York metropolitan area and you go to a golf course there, it's not a practical or realistic thing to tell those superintendents there, where you have almost entire 100% annual bluegrass tee to green, with the exception of the rough. So, you know, I don't know. I think POA gets a bad rep as far as insects that damage it, because we really don't have specialists that are primarily annual bluegrass pests. Yeah, the damage can be worse with weevil, especially on annual bluegrass compared to creeping bentgrass, but bentgrass isn't immune to those things. I think the safety net is a little bit higher with bentgrass, and that could be due to the production of more stoloniferous growth, that it can regenerate much quicker. But those would be the three big ones that we think of as far as pests, insect pests anyway.
Ben, real quick, Ben, when did annual bluegrass weevil become such a major pest on Poa annua?
You know, like the first report in the literature is 1930s in Connecticut, but it, you know, they just describe it as a small beetle. So we don't know if that was the actual culprit. Long Island in 1957, they isolated it from damage and sent it to the Smithsonian. So that's the first, you know, solid evidence, 57, 61. So, and really at that time, what superintendents were reporting was spring die out is what they would call it. The edges of fairways would die and nobody ever dug into the turf to see what it was. So really,
doesn't that boggle your mind that nobody actually like dug into the turf to see what was killing?
I mean, so at that time they had gone through all the scarab pests that we have entered this country, Japanese beetle, massive efforts there. And so that must have been causing turf damage, where you'd probably dig in and say, is this grub damage? But I mean, you think about managing turf in the 1950s, you know, they're probably mowing fairways at an inch. Probably the lowest mowing height at that time up until the 1970s was 187. You know, I mean, so you got to imagine that they were just trying to keep ahead of just mowing at that time. I'm sure they were applying chemicals that would give you 5 years of dollar spot control. I mean,
God, I miss
I'm
those
sure
days.
nobody was nobody was thinking about probing the soils for soil moisture, you know, right? You cut a cup and you look at
And
where
arsenic
roots
for
were.
soil control.
Yeah, nobody was talking about POA control. You're just happy to have green coverage, I'm sure.
So,
And probably fertilizing like crazy, like huge
they
amounts.
were. They, you know, you talk about that. You found that they do chew on bent grass, but I mean, what they have to be feeding on things other than Poa annua, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're talking like evolutionarily, I mean, these things have been on the planet for thousands of years. The group is semi-aquatic. So most likely what happened in the 30s or the 50s, in my opinion, and maybe I'll never prove this in my career, but I think what we're witnessing is a speciation event, because you can find these amateur collectors who find annual bluegrass weevils in parks, non-manicured turf areas, riverbanks, stuff like that. And there's a whole bunch of confusion with the group and reorganization with the group over time. But my opinion is, in a lifetime, what we're witnessing is a speciation event where these things diverge to feed on different plants. So you have almost sympatric speciation event going on. So maybe the ancestral Listernotus group is feeding on reeds and marsh sedges and whatnot, who knows? And then this other group found themselves on golf courses, fed on grasses, developed, and kind of went their own path evolutionarily. So that, you know, that's where I would look, is I'd look in wetlands and stuff like that to see where the old group is. But so that's probably what they were feeding on, you know, probably prior to the early 1900s in this country. So, and what we also see is this insect is moving out radially, much like an invasive species would. And so that wouldn't suggest that, you know, I would expect to see them in California. There's plenty of POA on the coast of California. They're supposedly present in over 40 states, according to museum collections. So people have collected them from other habitats other than golf courses. So, you know, that's a good Nature publication that nobody cares about. But
Oh, the department would care about that. That'll push you right into full professor once you get that Nature publication.
yeah, so be
You
like
look real
looking for
excited about it.
a needle in a haystack too.
Right.
So
Well, I wanted to, Pete, talk to you and Mike also, and Andy to some degree as well, in terms of the disease problem. So we know anthracnose, summer patch. What else do we have that you know, favors annual bluegrass? It gets a ton of diseases, but there are some diseases that are more so than others. And Pete, because you are the
Well, the most recent one was brown ring patch. I got a couple of photographs from one of my former students down in the southeast part of the state. He thought it was necrotic ring spot. Now, I didn't look at it under a microscope, but based on the time of year, which was like about 10 days ago, and what the ring looked like, was just a real thin yellow ring. Some of these rings coalesced. It looks just like Wadia patch or brown ring patch to me. I guess that can get on bentgrass too, John. I don't really know, but usually
I've never seen it. It was originally described on bentgrass in Japan. And I think that Frank Wong maybe has seen it on bentgrass out in California at some point, but with all the work that we've done since 2005, I've never seen it on bentgrass. It's only been on POA.
The good thing is it usually doesn't do very much damage. It's kind of superficial and it goes away pretty quickly. And there's plenty of fungicides that can keep it under control as well.
Right, but so let's talk about one of the diseases that affects both putting, you know, both golf course turf and sports fields and in summer patch. And you've got a lot of experience, Pete, in identifying that. Can you and Andy talk a little bit about the origin of that, and then maybe, like Andy, how big of a problem that is on athletic fields?
You have the problem because Pete named the disease, so I have no standing here to talk about it. But as far as your high-end sports fields, you know, college and pro in the north that have Kentucky bluegrass, it would be considered the #1 disease problem. And
So
after
are those people like spraying all the time preventively? Are they really aggressively trying to control that from the beginning,
not
or?
really aggressively, but follow pretty much what Pete has and yourself have talked to us about. But yeah, they're putting down preventative sprays on a regular basis every year for summer patch, generally. What are you laughing at?
Ben.
Oh, Ben.
McGraw made a good appearance into the.
Larry Stoll made a comment in here. Rapid blight is a new species with aquatic origin. Poa is selecting some new pests. Have you ever seen that up here, John? I think that's just something that you see more in southern areas.
Yeah, I know that Bruce Martin did some work on it, and maybe Larry will comment. He probably knows the whole geographic distribution, but I've never seen it up here. The only time I've ever seen it is at the GCSA Diagnostic Lab workshop that they did. Yeah.
I think it's associated with, is it more salty or saline water? So maybe
right.
Start using more reclaimed water up here. And again, as Larry Stoll had commented about, it's associated with salinity stress. So if we have sites that have that, maybe sure, yeah, we'll get some rapid blight up here. Could be a first report of rapid blight in Pennsylvania for you, John.
Love those pubs, yeah.
Oh, real quick, Andy, a quick question. When sports turf guys are applying these fungicides for preventative summer patch, are they watering them in? Are they pretty good about watering them in? And
I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm not there, but obviously, the discussion is use lots of carrier, sloppy mix, and get water on it afterwards to try to get it in.
Yeah, and I'd be a little bit, I don't know, John, you can chime in on this, and I see Darren Batisky is on here. He might have a couple of comments as well. I've always been thinking, yeah, if you can put it down in more than 2 gallons of water per 1,000 square feet, that would be ideal. Most people aren't set up to do that. And I would just say a very, very light syringe. The main thing is just to get it off the foliage so that it goes down to the crown area. If you really put a lot of water on that, I think most of that fungicide goes into the thatch layer, into the soil, and gets attenuated in there. Remember, the pathogen is, we call them ectotrophic mycelia. There are these brown mycelia which are located on the root tissue. They're not actually in the soil. They are on the root tissue, more up into the crown region. And what do you say in there? Alturgeon?
Oh, you said an authority.
Oh, an authority. Okay, so.
You're the summer patch authority.
You just want to get the fungicide off of the foliage, down into the crown region, and I wouldn't be trying to water it in an inch or 2 into the soil, because I think you're just going to lose it.
No, well, if my words suggested an inch or 2, that is incorrect. That's not what they're doing.
Yeah, it's really tough. I teach this to the students, and they'll say, well, so-and-so said they're supposed to be watered in. And my answer is always, it depends. So like on putting greens, if you can get over 2 gallons, I'm like, there's no reason to water it in at all if you have annual bluegrass and you're worried about summer patch. On roughs or higher cut turf, maybe you knock it off the surface. If you can't get to 3 or 4 gallons, just knock it off the surface. But I think that almost all of the diagnosticians and the pathologists tell people to water it in, and I just don't think that's necessary.
I think, I agree, water it in, but not a lot. You don't want to wash it down too deep.
So basically,
there's not very much research on that. We're just kind of shooting the breeze here and speculating a lot.
I wish we disagreed so we could argue with each other.
Well, I'm sure you're going to get into, what to spray, but timings keep changing from what I hear. So can you guys address timings a little bit?
Tell me what the weather is going to be. I'll tell you about timing.
Yeah, I mean, I still go by the.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I still go by the kind of like, once you get 65 degrees consecutively, for 3-4 days, 2-inch depth, 2 p.m. That's kind of what everybody talks about. I feel like once you get to that,
everybody talks about it, but has that been substantiated as a really effective method?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't done any of the research. I can't get
I think that came.
I can't get summer patch at our research facility.
Didn't that work come out of Bruce Clark at Rutgers, somewhat looking at soil temperature timings and?
I don't know if they ever.
I don't know if that's ever. I don't know if they ever published. I think Hank Wilkinson. Oh, that's going back a ways.
Yeah.
At Illinois, did a little work on that, but I never saw it really published, and never saw that anybody looked at different temperatures or if that's even effective. The thing about using temperatures too is you're getting these constant fluctuations in temperatures and moisture in the soil, and that affects pathogen. I don't think it's as reliable as seed germination or insect development. I think the way pathogens work, especially these fungi, it's just a little more complicated than that. But as a general guideline, that probably coincides with what, John? Early May, mid-May, something like that.
Yeah, probably. I don't know.
That, and I think that's what, if you just go by, like if you've had summer patch problems before and they mostly occur in June or July, get the fungicide down a month in advance.
Yeah. So tell me what that is, because as I've talked to both of you over the years,
I've seen it in June. I've seen it. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I've seen summer patch occur in mid-June. I've seen it occur in July, and sometimes it doesn't occur until August. So you could be wasting a lot of money. But
When's your first app down?
May, mid-May.
Yeah, I've been told other things.
I think it depends.
Really?
Like I've seen soil temperatures in like sand-based green or sand-based athletic fields in Philadelphia in April be up in those temperatures, and so getting down earlier.
I think
this would be a good time to point out that we have 4 pathologists who work at Penn State. It's a crime that we have any disease problem.
I'm an agronomist.
It must be why I get like 7 opinions every time I ask this question.
Totally. My goodness.
Well, no. I mean, I think if you're super cautious and you've had problems with it in the past, then you can just, if you can afford it, go out in April. Hell, go out in March.
Yeah, that's some sound advice there, Pete. Just start dumping on for no sake.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's move on. Let's move on from the disease and the pest and start talking about cultural practices, as we're 45 minutes into this mess. So, Max, I'm gonna defer to you. We do a lot of work on POA, and we look at things that favor it and try to get rid of it. Fertility is one of those things, right? We're in Pennsylvania. If you're in Philadelphia, they don't want it. If you're in Pittsburgh, they want it. So can you talk a little bit about fertility and the influence that has on POA populations?
Sure. Yes, I can. Thank you. And it's really quite simple. POA has high nutrient requirements, and the most successful managers focus on the 3 primary nutrients. Will supply, or at least not supply, but they will ensure that 0.3 to 0.6 pounds of N per thousand is becoming available each growing month. So depending on how much organic matter, they might have to supply all of that, or they might only have to supply a fraction of it. But it has high phosphorus requirements as well, and that's in part why it also favors a neutral pH, is because that favors availability of phosphorus. So Poa annua has a pH optimal range of about 6.5 to 7.3, and that's mostly governed by phosphorus availability. It has a high potassium requirement, typically 0.2 to 0.4 pounds of K2O per thousand per month. So it really needs all 3 of the primary nutrients with good regularity. And another interesting thing about POA is, unlike every other turfgrass species, it has demonstrated a true improvement in winter hardiness due to potassium fertilization, whereas it hasn't been shown with any other species. And that work all came out of Rutgers, in 2015, when they had that very harsh winter with ice cover for 48 days, and the control plots on a potassium study didn't survive. So that kind of separates POA apart from the other cool season turf grasses, in that they do benefit from winterization with K.
So that's great to know. If we lower K and we starve it, since it's not hurting the other species, can we help to control POA by keeping our potassium levels low?
I believe so. I believe that's a component of integrated pest management. Now, I think that the best tool to eradicate POA is organic chemistry, a la restricted pesticides.
I'm gonna tweet that out quick. The
Sure.
first one.
Sure. That'll go great at my patchouli event tonight. But,
Hey, Max.
So
is-
Matt,
is
oh,
it-
I got a
is
question
it-
for you, Max. Like all these, like Mike listed all the 83 graduate theses who have looked at POA through the years, and a lot of them have been on fertility management. And it seems like there's always a study that's run for like 2 years and then might not see an effect. And talking to Dave Huff, who I wish was on this call, he will say, it's very adaptable. So whatever you provided, it kind of adapts to whether it's low or high nutrient needs. It's very adaptable through mixing, sexual selection, seed production, and the like. So can you speak to any of that? Have you done or have you seen any long-term studies that would suggest, maybe we can't control it through just choking it off with one nutrient?
well, I fear that you might have misunderstood me, because I don't feel that, withholding a nutrient or supplying a nutrient is a appropriate control method. Organic chemistry is the appropriate control method, whether it be paclobutrazol or methoxylin, or combination of the two with Cutlass. But as a component of integrated pest management, combining any of those organic chemistries with low phosphorus and high boron will reduce the competitive advantage of POA.
Yeah, I would agree with that. What I'm seeing from the courses that I work with, I'm seeing some really low nitrogen levels going on.
What's really low?
Like 1.5 pounds for the year or less
Not that low.
on putting surfaces. So, I think all the work from the Rutgers anthracnose years really got us back on this light and frequent and getting up in those, much higher ranges, 3 to 4.5 pounds per thousand per year. Now I think we're reverting back down. It's one of the trends that I'm seeing out in the field.
It's just that history repeats itself. It's ridiculous. Like in the 90s when people were like lean and mean and everybody talked about, 0.5 pound down in August, and they were champion for that. It was awesome. And then all of a sudden anthracnose became a problem. I mean, that's where the whole anthracnose project even came up. It's like it just started crushing people.
At the same time, I've seen these over several years now, and really exceptional performance, which makes me think about this ability to train the plant almost to get it accustomed to these lower amounts, that it's going to adapt more than something that is a bent grass that's selected through classical means or otherwise.
Well,
the pathogen is changing too. And, if you get a really bad, I don't think we've had tremendous stressful years like we did. I think the last time I remember severe heat stress was back in 2010, which is quite a while ago. But I think some of the years that we had that really bad anthracnose were just, the weather was just really conducive for it. But everybody was really low. Now we got better fungicides now too, but if you depend on fungicides for anthracnose control, you're going to probably run into resistance problem before too long anyway. So nitrogen is a really great tool if you've had issues with it in the past.
Well, we're working on our ITS papers right now, and in 2017 we published Keyoung's study on the low nitrogen, high iron PGR program. Max, have you heard about that program? That kind of general program that's out there? So we did that, and after 2 years, it looked awesome. Like we made it through the 2.5 years of the study, and everything looked great. We didn't have problems, and we were like, look, this is what the reductions in POA were, or the increases, depending on what direction you went. And then we published it, and then in year 3, all the plots took a turn and declined. Quality on them went straight downhill, and we were going to kill it and just kill the project. And then we said, let's see what happens if we keep it going. Well, we kept it going. And now in 2014 and 15, and then all of a sudden it leveled off. Quality was good in all the plots. We've got we've got plots out there in that study that have never received any fertility since 2010. You can't pick them out. They look perfect. There's no problem with them. So I mean, Max, I need to talk to you about this separately and try and figure out what the hell's going on with our plots. But there could be something to it that, you know, Ben, you said it, like train the plant, or maybe like somehow the plant starts to adapt and can survive under these conditions where you have zero nitrogen in the soil, or at least supplemental nitrogen, in 9 years, and they still look fine. Most of our studies and research last 2 or 3 years, and then you shut them down and you don't look at the long-term results. And I think that something can be said for that, extending these things out a little
Hey,
longer.
Max, could that be a lag time on, I guess, mineralization on from like the thatch layers and the mat layers and stuff like that? If you're over time, then you're all of a sudden you're seeing that kind of happening those years.
It could be. I mean, it could be there is a good buildup of organic matter that that could be mineralizing due to the fact that there hasn't been any new additions because the plant has been end starved. But I don't know. I'm wondering perhaps if maybe someone with a drop spreader didn't just perhaps go over those plots at some point. You know, the guy with the drop spreader. Yeah,
I understand that. No, it's not a drop spreader issue. Everybody at Valentine is trained to stay the hell off of those plots. I don't think that, and even if it was a one-time thing where they got some fertility, I could see that would be, you know, like something in the short term, but not for 5 straight years after we had that decline. My theory is that we had the mineralization happen and the plants were still getting nitrogen under these low nitrogen plots, which are 0.5 pound per 1,000 per year. That's it. And then we got that, and then it mineralized everything that it had to keep kind of some growth going. And in that 3rd year, it collapsed. Like, we lost turf on all accounts. I just don't know what happened after that and why we have no problem growing healthy turf in plots that have gotten either 0 or 0.5 pound of nitrogen per year in all this time. We even have alleyways in the border, and you know, you can see differences, but there's no way to pick out like where there's been no fertility on there. I'll have to walk the plots with you sometime, Max, and take a look.
Yeah, no, I'd like that. But level 2 has high organic matter. You know, that soil was prepared with a good bit of organic matter, so it could very well be that it's just living off the gravy.
Yeah, but I mean, 2010 to 2020, that's a lot of gravy.
That's a lot of gravy.
Yeah. So we talked a little about fertility. What about some other things like cultural practices? Like, is Jeff still? Yeah, he's still here. Jeff, what do you think about like seed head control and those types of things? I have another poll. I'm going to see who controls seed head and who doesn't. So,
well, let's go ahead.
I'd say just talk about it a little bit while I.
Yeah, seed head control. I mean, it's you know, I tell people, if you're going to try to keep Poa on your site, you know, a putting green, you know, you should maybe think about not putting, or, you know, putting seed head material down. You know, there's all kinds of stuff out there that works well. Depends on where you are and how you want to use it, all those kind of things. I'm not here to talk about use of it. I'm talking about, you know, should I or should not use it. I tell people, like I said earlier, choose your path and don't waver from it. If you're going to grow Poa, I really think you should be suppressing seed heads. If whatever amount of stress comes from the plant producing a seed head, it won't be there, because seed head suppression means the plant never produces the seed head. Okay, it's not, you know, it's suppression of the seed.
It's very profound, very profound. Yeah.
Well, no, this is a big deal, because I've had superintendents come to me say, oh yeah, I can you know, suppress my seed heads, and I go out their site and look. I was like, look, you have seed heads everywhere. But what has happened is they've keeping the seed heads below the putting surface, and they have a smooth surface. So they're suppressed the seed head in how high it grows, not the fact that it did grow. And that's a big distinction you have to be careful of, because there are some PGRs out there that don't control. They never are never marketed for controlling seed heads. It's not a bad thing. It's just your definition of suppression, you know. So I always make that very clear. Yeah, I think that, hold on one second. I think that suppression of seed heads, if you're going to try to grow Poa annua, is a good thing, unless you have Poa annua that doesn't really produce much seed heads. I've been to sites where they say I've got no seed head problems, and they're 80% Poa annua. You know, like
Ben,
you said, John.
Does Oakmont control seed heads?
I don't know now. You know, maybe market.
I think everybody controls seed heads. I think the one thing
No,
that's,
no, a lot of people don't.
Have you seen a change in the market, or at least in strategies, with the loss of embark? Have you seen a change with that?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, people are looking to other options, and there's, depends on which one. Some people are saying taking like an option, saying, look, I'm just going to mow it. As far as I know, there's still some embark out there. John, do you know anything about that?
There's embark out there if you had it, but it's off the market now. They're
Yeah,
not
it's
making
definitely
it
off the
anymore.
market. They're not making it anymore. But I know
I saw a tweet where a superintendent had like shelves full of embark, and he was like, "I'm stockpiling this to save it for my, for retirement." But everybody's using Primo Proxy or a new Proxy now, and the biggest thing now that we hear about is these fall applications of Proxy. They can put them out.
I would say that's one of the bigger changes right now, and talking to just surveying superintendents in our area. It seems like the fall applications are pretty solid. There's just a bunch of people who are very cautious about doing that. I think that's the thing, is that there are people who aren't on the fall proxy applications because they want to see how it looks for other people for a couple more years before they start integrating that into their program. So that's probably the biggest thing that I've seen this year as far as a change in seed head suppression. I don't think mowing's going to do much for seed head reduction, solely mowing on a putting surface.
No, they're just trying to make the surface smooth enough. They're not going to reduce it. They're just trying to make a playable surface.
Yeah, I mean
it's not great. I agree.
No, I would think that's not a viable strategy. I mean, we have seed
I don't either,
heads.
but I'm just saying people have done it.
In our studies where we looked at nitrogen and PGR combinations for annual bluegrass weevil, we were mowing to 1/10 of an inch, and you'll still get tons of seed heads without regulation.
Oh, I agree. I did want to address the proxy in the fall scenario. Poa annua seed head goes into induction period in the fall of the year, and proxy, being ethylene-based product, really kind of affects that well. I mean, it's the science supports fall applications of it. Lots of people have, just like anything else you do, you hear things from the field like, oh, it works, it doesn't work. You see research studies that are all over the board, but I think there's some validity to it.
Yeah, we've seen it. I mean, we've done it for the last few years, and it seems to work pretty well. We haven't seen it in our plots, but the question that comes up is like people started seeing brown ring patch becoming more of a problem once they started going to their fall applications of proxy, and we've seen some herbicides and growth regulators exacerbate brown ring patch. So like this is, every time you start talking about these things, it's like, if you do this, there's going to be a consequence, right? It's like, it's very difficult to get them all out. So anyway, we can move on. Most of the people in this thing, 8 out of 15 people that were still remaining, said they're not even controlling seed heads. So, so we can move on from that. We've kind of gotten fairly long into here. We're already at an hour. I thought maybe instead of talking about all those other cultural practices, which are obviously important, maybe we could talk about controlling POA. And Pete, I was going to turn to you and have you talk a little bit about your basamid studies that you did back in the day, and then maybe we'll talk a little bit about POA cure as well.
All right, well, yeah, basamid, not many people use it, first of all. Part of that reason is because not many people are doing establishments these days, not a whole lot of new golf courses or renovation projects going in. Also, it's expensive and the price has gone up on it. So let me just get back up a little bit. Basamid now is sold by AMVAC. I don't know who's producing it, if it's still BASF. But anyway, AMVAC is selling it. It's the only viable fumigant that I'm aware of for use on turf here in the northern part of the country. It's a granular and it's extremely fine. If you've never worked with it before, it's a real challenge. It has the consistency of a fine sugar. So you've got to have a really good drop spreader in order to use that effectively. Otherwise, it leaks out of the side of the spreader and even through the holes at the bottom of the hopper. So a good Gandy spreader, brand new one, is probably the best way to go with that. It's 99% active. The active ingredient is dazimit. And I think the main use right now, when I started working with this, people wanted to renovate fairways with it. But it's just so expensive now. It's just not in the cards. Plus, there was a lot of runoff. It's very mobile in water. So, and you've got to water it in order for it to be effective. Somewhere between a half an inch and a quarter inch of water. And if you get a rain after you apply it, that material is going to run off a slope. And I've seen cases where it's run right down into a stream, and you can see it killed everything in between that fairway, and it just made a path right down to the stream. I saw that 4 or 5 times on fairways down in the Philadelphia area when a lot of people were using it down there. So you just got to be really careful with that material. It's very effective for POA seed control. And it also is a post-emergence material, but you know, nobody's going to use it for post-emergence because of cost. It's really for killing POA seed in the soil, and it's very effective for that. The rate that Brad Park actually did his master's degree on that. He's at Rutgers now. Figured out the rate as 350 pounds per acre. And you've got to have a fumigator's license to apply it, according to the people I talked to at PDA. So
Really? That's
now
not new?
well, I've talked to 2 people at PDA. One told me, and this was years ago, no, it's a herbicide. You don't need a fumigator's license. Okay. And then I talked to another, a regional agent, and that person said, yes, you do need one. So if there's an argument, you know, I would go with the more strict interpretation of that, because if something happens and you get a PDA visit and you don't have a fumigator's license, you know, you might be answering some tough questions. I mean,
yeah, it seems like there would be a definitive answer on that, and not like
well,
a couple people at PDA that
it's labeled as a fumigant. Okay. And there is a fumigator license category. So that tells me you probably should have a license. There's all sorts of application difficulties too. Now you can put this, you can till it into the soil, or you can put it on the surface. If you're going to put it on for a surface application, like on a putting green for renovation, and then seed bent grass into it, you want to aerate extensively, like 2 or 3 times over, maybe even slice, apply it, water it in, and you can even cover it with plastic. I've worked with superintendents who have made their own tarps out of just plastic rolls that they bought at Lowe's, and then they've sealed it with a sprayable adhesive, and they've done it that way. You don't have to cover it. You can just water it in and keep watering it for several days after the fact. We find that there's about 5% difference in control between covering and not covering. You get about 5% more control of POA. So if you don't cover it, you're getting like 95% control. If you cover it, you're getting 99 to 100% control.
But if you don't cover it, you have to have that water cap.
Yes. Now they refer to it as a seal in a situation where you're just applying it to the surface. It's not about sealing the surface. It's just about keeping the material breaking down and activating it and trying to keep some of the gas into the soil.
Yeah, right. That's what I was going to say, is that it's really the gaseous form that does the control. So
right. So
the soil
yeah.
and the water helps to keep it in the soil.
Right. Dazomet breaks down to MITC, and that's what actually kills a POA seed. And you can smell it. I mean, if you apply it, if you ever worked with that, it's got a pretty strong odor. I mean, you can really tell when the gas is escaping. Incidentally, when you do water it in and you're putting down 1/4 to a half an inch, you should do that incrementally, like maybe 1/10 of an inch at a time, so it doesn't puddle. Because if it puddles, it might run off, and it's going to move with that water. One more thing I'd like to say about that is it's a challenging product to work with because of the actual, I'm getting nasty texts here. Actual application procedure is a little challenging because if it's a windy day, the stuff is so fine, even through a drop spreader, it's going to blow around. Okay. And if you do it really early in the morning and there's moisture on the green, because of the fineness of the material, it's going to track. It's going to build up on the wheels of the spreader. It's going to build up on your your footwear, and you're going to move it around. And where you've tracked it, you're not going to get good control. So you got to get as much moisture off the surface as you can, and then apply it when there's no wind. So it's a little bit of a challenge that way. And the last thing I'll say is I always get questions about how long should you wait before you seed, and it's temperature dependent. So the colder it is, the longer you should wait. Okay, and they have some information on the label about that. When we did our studies, we were doing it in pretty warm weather, like mid 70s, and we waited 3 days and we seeded and never saw any problems. I think the label says about 7 or 8 days. You could also do a little seedling test with lettuce seed to see if it's viable. But so that's my little spiel. I'm getting all sorts of nasty texts and.
Do you want me to read what those texts were?
Yeah.
I got yelled at.
Look,
I can't hear a word you're saying.
we could talk about John now. He's muted.
I think it's time to just.
I was checking my phone messages. I was saying that I got a nasty text saying it's been an hour. We should probably wrap this up, and that was from Pete Lanscoot. And Fidanza confirmed saying yes.
Well, we're starting to lose attendees, you know.
And then I said, says the guy who won't shut up.
I'm seeing the attendee number going down.
Yeah, my dogs are getting
Fine.
hungry.
We're gonna record this, and then people can watch it
if
later. 'Cause
anybody
I'm
wants
sure
to know,
people will watch this for
together.
hours. It'll be great.
We sometimes get together for happy hours, you know, in real life down at the local pub. And this is not the stuff we talk about most of the time.
No, not at all. So
it comes along, and then we talk about like biochemistry
yes.
and genetics and stuff like that.
We didn't talk about much of the herbicides. People ask me about pre-emergent herbicides, and
You do it next time.
Yeah, I don't want to go crazy about it. And Jeff, maybe that'll be for a future edition, herbicides for POA control. But obviously, POA Cure is out on the market now. We've done a lot of evaluations with POA Cure, and it looks pretty good. And I think that people, at least for golf courses, they're trying to get it for sports fields and home lawns now. But for golf courses, that's going to be, I think, kind of a game changer if people want to get rid of POA, at least, you know, in the short term before resistance becomes an issue. So other than that, instead of talking about anything else, I'll wrap it up. But what I wanted to do is give everybody the opportunity. Andy, are you outside or inside? Are you smoking a cigar outside or inside?
I moved. That was me. When I sat down, I moved. I decided it was time to go outside and have a cigar.
Smart.
You know, you got to have a cigar.
Yeah, I thought that I would just wrap it up by having everybody go around, and I'll name the person because I have them as an order on my screen, but you probably don't in the same order. And just give your 15-second, what's, you know, an important tip you can get to somebody that wants to control or get rid of or manage their POA. And so I'm going to start with Fidanza because you're in my top left of my screen, and give us your quick tip.
Okay, sound words of advice. Check with your local state extension turf weed specialist to get all the latest information. And look for research-based data. Show me the data, as Dr. Waddington would say.
Awesome. Lanscoot, you're up.
If you're ever doing any renovation, don't assume the POA seed is not there. I've made that mistake many times. Try to make provisions to control the seed before you do renovations, unless you're absolutely sure, because then you get it coming back in again.
Okay, Borger.
Yeah, pick a path and stay on it. Don't change midstream, and realize this is not something you can do in one summer. It's going to take 3 to 5 years to show any significant things if you're trying to look at a low and slow reduction. I got more if you want to go there, but I think I'll stop.
Okay, good advice. McGraw?
Unmute.
I agree. Pick a path and stay on it. That path should be Poa annua, and for golf. And hit it hard, hit it frequent, disrupt it consistently, and it will be a superior surface. So
Max isn't up next, but I see that he disagrees with you, so I'm looking forward to getting to him. Brad, you're up.
I guess with your application, whatever process it is, make sure you're well calibrated. Talk to other superintendents, see what they're doing. And don't rule out selectively using Roundup as a selective control for controlling POA in the late summer, early fall. So on blue and ryegrass fairways, higher cut grasses.
Okay. Also, warm season grasses that go dormant, you can use some Roundup if you don't have resistance.
Absolutely.
McNitt.
Hey, baseball guys, have some guts. Get on a trim it program, put 1/8 of a pound in there and stick with it. Please, I need somebody who sticks with it the whole year and then can give us a testimonial on how much POA they controlled. Have some guts.
Have some guts. Bold words from Dr. McNitt. Max, you're
Have
up.
some guts, apply pesticides.
Yeah.
And I agree with, pick a plan and stick with it, and eradicate your POA. You'll sleep better, and bent grass with the proper grooming putts fabulously. So,
Any fertility suggestions?
well, if you're looking to make the conversion, don't be bashful with the boron, with zinc, and with copper, because bent grass has a much higher tolerance for those than Poa annua. So that will contribute to the prompt demise.
Awesome.
Of POA.
Almost knocked over my thing. So you see my green screen now. How do I get that to come back?
Did you answer all the questions in the chat?
No, we did not actually. There were only 2 questions. One was just that they have issues in Texas on their outfielder spots at softball, which would make sense. Obviously, the more worn areas are going to get a problem. Andy, for you, do people just sod those areas? Like, what do they do if you have an area where someone just stands in an outfield or on a very concentrated area? What do they do?
No, I mean, when it wears out, there's sodding that happens in spots, sure. But I mean, the POA, you plug, and eventually you get so much POA that you can't plug anymore. And that's the time where I'd like to see somebody stick on a trim it program in a baseball outfield for the entire season and see how it works.
Well, maybe Charles Good will take you up on that and pummel it and stick with it. The other question we had was how will or is climate change affecting POA growth and management in the United States? So probably a question for what's the guy's name at Penn State, the famous meteorologist?
Mike Bonanza.
Mike Mann, right?
Michael Mann.
Mike's a big expert on climate change, aren't you, Mike?
Yeah, well, we call it climate resiliency now. Yes.
Is that right? Is that what the official word is? So we don't call it climate change?
Well, I see the word resilient and resiliency sneaking into the social media discussions on climate change. I try to keep up to date with the latest acronyms.
Very good. Resiliency is not an acronym, by the way.
It could be. It could be.
It could be. It'd be a long one.
I don't think we have any experts on this topic on this.
Yeah, I don't know how it will affect it in terms of POA. I can say that from a weather standpoint, we do see Bermuda grass moving further north and things like that. So there's obviously some changes that are happening. And I think we even see some diseases that are starting to move.
And diseases too. It's happening very slowly, but new diseases moving in. Oh, weeds too. Like
Kalinga.
Yeah, more nutsedge up in our area, more goosegrass up in our area that we haven't seen before. May not be climate change, but could be just transmittal of seed. But warm season weeds moving north.
Right. All right. With that, hour and 15 minutes. I'm enjoying my drinks with you all, but we're going to end the recording so we can stop it. Before we do that, I am going to give a shout out to one of our participants who was Kennedy Ellis. Kennedy is a student in Michigan who contacted me about possible graduate school. She's in high school. She's already talking about Turf graduate school. And Max, I think she might have emailed you.
Hi, Kennedy.
She's interested in soils and is going to play golf in college as an undergraduate, and then wants to come to grad school somewhere.
Great preparation.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like to see somebody that young that's so motivated to already think about grad school 4 or 5 years out. So with that, I'm going to end the recording, but thanks everybody for coming. Hopefully we will do this again. I enjoyed it. Hopefully people didn't get put to sleep. Some of the panelists in our session probably fell asleep part of it. So hopefully next time we do it, it'll go well and we'll be able to share some information. So thanks everybody.
You guys.
Yeah, thanks for being here.